Welcome back to the McCoy Leadership Podcast, elevating your impact through valuable insights and conversations about leadership. Welcome back to the McCoy Leadership Podcast. Today, we're excited to have Dale Turnbull with us. Dale is the creator of the 7 Positions of Leadership and owner of Lead, Adapt, Impact. Dale has many years of experience in leadership, and today we're going to dig into what he can tell us and teach us about leadership. Dale, thank you so much for joining us. Tell us a little bit about how you ended up where you are.
Well, thank you for having me on. It's great to be here. Yeah, I can give you a brief rundown. So I started my career in recruitment, more or less. Well, actually, the year before I started in recruitment, I was selling sun cream to Germans in the Canary Islands, but that's a whole other story. But I transitioned into the recruitment sphere, and I very, very quickly got into learning and development. Because for me, as much as I like sales, I like that interpersonal, connective side of things, there's always been a part of me that really wants to help people grow, develop, and really achieve what they're looking to do. Now, I worked within a recruitment company for like 6 years, working with, I think I trained within that 6 years over 500-600 people, because we were getting new people coming into the business every month. Recruitment, as some of you may know, has got quite a high churn rate, but ultimately, I really wanted to take ownership of developing people. Because a lot of the time when we're leaders, there's a big focus on, well, it's up to them to get the success, it's up to them to get the results, which is obviously very powerful, because by the other person having the locus of their control, the locus of their success, they can create real results for themselves. But on the flip side, if they're successful for their results, well, what do I do? Why am I in the picture? So the way I like to look at things, and the way I've sort of grown within my leadership is, well, if I take full responsibility for their success, like, how can I be different? What can I do differently? How can I communicate differently? How can I be with that person differently? There's nothing more frustrating in my mind. I've told them 100 times and they're not doing it. Well, have you considered, well, what happens if you could tell them or communicate that in a different way that might land? So that's sort of where I've come from. Since then, I've studied things like neurolinguistic programming, which really helped me tailor my communication. I'm aware, Amos, that you've done a lot of stuff regarding DISC profiles.
Yes.
And for me, as opposed to looking at, okay, this is what a person is from their personality, for me, I'm like, okay, well, what are the facets that make up the structure? How is the person thinking? And if I can tailor how I communicate to resonate deeply with their thinking, they're going to be more motivated to do things, they're going to understand it a lot better, and ultimately, there's going to be a higher chance of implementation on whatever you're communicating. So once I did the NLP side of things, I was coaching people, and I still coach people individually in teams now, but I realized one of the biggest holes that I've found within the leadership space is, okay, knowing how to be flexible as a leader, knowing how to adapt yourself. And as much as there are lots of great leadership models out there, I'm not going to bash leadership, a lot of them have a lot of complexity to them. And there can be great trainings that people can receive, but I found often in my experience when external trainers had come into other organizations I was working with, it was a great day or a great 2 days, but there was never that ongoing implementation. So I came up with the 7 Positions of Leadership, which is actually built on our underlying psychology and understanding of the world. And that's what I do. I put that out there to give leaders better insight and enhance their flexibility. So that's a bit of a nutshell.
I like it. Now, you mentioned communication there, and one of the people in history that has always fascinated me is Winston Churchill. And I believe, and I might have the title wrong, there is a book that's called The Power of Words, and it talks about how Winston Churchill, knew and understood and studied when he was creating a speech, what words to use. And my point is, Winston Churchill, many people look at it and would say, when he spoke and had a speech or did something on the radio, it resonated with everybody. And I argue that point a little bit, that I love Winston Churchill and I think he was a brilliant speaker. But at the same time, I'm sure there were still some people that he did not resonate with, because we recognize today that everybody's a little bit different. And, although a message may hit 90% of the people, there's still 10% that you maybe have to deliver that message a little bit differently to. What I'm really getting at is, do you believe that some people are just born better communicators than others?
I mean, born, I would say, is a stretch, but I would say we probably pick up a lot of our communication, how we interact, from obviously our upbringing, our parents, the social interactions we see. But for example, with my stepson now, when I'm working with my wife and things, we're aware of the communication we're using. Obviously, he's being a child, he's having his moments, right? But how can he communicate these things? So I think there's an element of being taught these things as we're younger, consciously or otherwise. So if you are a leader and you're aware of things, how can you start to incorporate that into your family and like all the people that you're with? But I think some people can just take stuff on. They can assimilate patterns and ways of speaking a lot more naturally, because they're very good at just almost mirroring and actually taking that information in. So I think it's a skill that can be learned, but I would say, yeah, I'd say there's like the 1 in a million who's like really good and just gets it, but everybody else, there's elements of learning, studying, because ultimately we all have preferences in how we speak and how we communicate. So the first step is awareness of, well, what is your baseline? Because if you know this is my baseline, you can speak to others. However, coming back to the Winston Churchill point, I mean, I fully agree. He's not going to hit everybody. I'll give you an example. So if let's say you're delivering a leadership training or about to put a speech out there, I mean, we've all been there. We've all been in that management meeting when senior leadership or senior managers about to go a speech, and we've got, oh, here we go again. Right? There's always those. So what you can do, for example, is like, okay, so some of you are really excited to be here and like are looking forward to what's going to be happening. Okay, all the people who are excited. And then you can also say, well, and there's probably some of you who are a little bit skeptical. They're like, what's this going to be about? Okay, is this going to be the same meeting as last time? So by pacing and connecting to their external experience, I'm ultimately using both coins. So I think there are ways of communication that won't always get 100% of people, because there will always be exceptions. But there's ways, on the one hand, if you know the tools, you can be very specific when you're working with an individual, that you can also be more general to encompass a large amount of the populace when having like bigger discussions or trainings, for example.
So for our listeners, I think the most important thing there is that you just said we can all learn to get better at communicating. So, I mean, that is the key piece, is that we can get better. We can learn it, and we can achieve. We might not all be Winston Churchill, but we can get there. Now, one of the topics I wanted to kind of touch on today is you specialize in the difference between a manager and a leader, and going from a manager to a leader. And that really, one, resonates with me. I know as a young manager, and you will notice I did not say leader, I struggled with sometimes making that shift from being a supervisor to a manager to a leader. There's a big difference. And somebody recently said, they repeated a quote, the tools that got us to where we are today might not be the same tools we need to get to the next level. So can you explain and define for the listeners, what is the difference between a manager and a leader in your eyes?
So, very good question. So when I think of a manager, I think of, and there's no bias here, but I think of, let's say, your general person who maybe works within retail, they're managing a store. These are like the stereotypical. Ultimately, they're making sure people just do the day-to-day. It's like almost like an operator. They're just making stuff, not like operator and leader, but they're just making sure that the cogs turn, the things happen. And I think to be a leader, there's a few different aspects of it. Now, in the 7 positions of leadership model that you mentioned, there are 7 different types of leader, and they have different pros and cons. For example, the stereotypical leader that I think we talk about, the majority in society, is the one that's taking active steps, leading from the front, taking a lot of really good action. They know where they're going, they know their direction, they're really pushing people. And also, that's normally the stereotypical success in business, because to build a business, to create a business, to lead a business, you need to know where you're going, you need to have a direction, and you need to ultimately be taking steps. And you need to be the one who's up front leading the way. But there are some times when that style of leadership can actually be quite problematic. So working within the recruitment space, you've got the leader who's leading from the front, but if he's going at 100 miles an hour, he's leaving tons of people behind because he's going so fast, so there's a lot of distance.
Yep.
Now, there are some leaders that need to push their team, guide their team forward. Now, for the leader that's up front, that's like running or making really great progress, to actually take a step back and to push the team, that can be quite frustrating because people take a while to take steps to develop. But ultimately, the person who pushes people from behind, encourages them to lead themselves, that's the person who develops leaders within an organization. So I think for me, a leader is somebody who, in general, knows why they're there, has a solid purpose for what they're doing, and I think is looking to create something better, however that looks, be it a better team, better business, better profits, ultimately somebody striving for more, as opposed to just, quote unquote, doing a job that I'm getting paid for. So that'll be the main distinction from my side of things.
So as people are making that shift, and I'll use the example, which I have used in the past, of just a manufacturing plant, and you got the guy that operates the machine, and he's the best machine operator that you have. And so eventually he naturally becomes a supervisor because he's the best that you got. And he's now, that guy that's making sure the cogs are turning and things are happening. But you take him from being a manager and say, now we want you to take the role as the plant manager, and now you're in a leadership role. And so one of the things that I have seen over the years, it took me a few years to understand it, but when you have somebody that's paid by the hour all their life, and then one day you say, we want to move you into this new position and we want to make you salaried. That is, number one, people always struggle with that because, I only want to work from 9 to 5. And you talk about a mind shift that happens. Why do people struggle so much to go from and I'm going to say hourly mentality, and have the mind shift to going to a leadership salary, if that makes sense?
That's good. So I think there's a few different aspects to it. The first thing I would look at, I would say it would vary for everybody, but there's a few dynamics that I would take into account. So, for example, the first thing is, if they're just doing their 9 to 5 and they've got a certain thing, they've got a lot of certainty in where they're at. Like it's safe, it's predictable. One of the challenges with leadership is it's about taking steps into the unknown. By doing that 9 to 5, by doing that thing, nothing much is necessarily changing. So there's reliability to it. And ultimately, by moving into a new position, they're going to do stuff wrong. They're going to make mistakes. There's going to be challenges, which can create a lot of internal conflict for people. And this is why having a coach is great, because you can work with some of these internal challenges that sometimes we can't even put into words. I mean, men are normally worse than women from my personal experience. And about verbal, it's like, I don't know, I just feel weird, But working through some of those barriers, that's one thing. But on the flip side, if you look at the plant manager, like I heard a story about a plant manager very similar. They didn't want to take the promotion because then they were managing the people in the plant. Now let's look at that. The relationship they have, ultimately, they're part of the guys. They're part of in stereotypical. They're part of the crew. They're part of the people doing that work, right? If they're to progress, they have a different relationship. They're no longer friends. They're no longer colleagues. There's this tension and difference. which also creates insecurity and instability. If this person is, let's say, love these people, work with them, thinks they're great, and then they have to change role, they have to hold people accountable, they have to do those things, that would also create tension and challenges and problems. So I think that there's a whole host of things, but ultimately, the best leaders and managers are able to be flexible and deal with uncertainty. But you hear all of the success stories out there of people who are really successful because it all went wrong.
Yep.
Like stuff broke, it didn't happen. It was like they tell you their trauma story or whatever, but essentially big stuff happened and it made them have to shift.
Yes.
There wasn't, for most people, there wasn't a natural normal progression, or at least the stories I hear about. So these are the things. Big change needs to occur, and that can be really uncomfortable for people, especially if they don't have help and support and guidance through that, because it ain't easy.
So what would be your advice to the VP of operations, and you have a candidate internally that, like we just talked about, that possibly could make that shift, or we look to the outside, we decide we're going to take the candidate from the inside. What are some of the practical steps that we can take to help that person get ready for and get the new tools and have that mindset?
Gotcha. So, I mean, the first thing would be you need to understand, okay, what tools and criteria you need to assess. So there needs to be an assessment of what that would look like. But ultimately, think about what help and support they need. Do they need an external coach to come help them, come support them, come talk about the stuff that people don't normally talk about in business, especially in certain types of business? What emotional support might they need, but also what sort of structural support they need. One of the biggest things, I actually did a video on this recently that's on my LinkedIn. Regarding leadership, it's about we want to create more certainty. So let's just imagine this person's coming into this new role. Just by telling them the problems they will face, to be honest, there might be some challenges working out the working relationship. There may be some challenges with, okay, you get in the organization and stuff. If you know what job they're going to do and you've got a good sense of that, just by letting them know the potential challenges, it makes it a lot easier. It's almost like you're talking about the elephant in the room. So I think it's about staying in communication, managing those expectations, being aware of where that person's strengths and weaknesses are through DISC profiles, 7 positions of leadership. Ultimately, have a metric to be able to know where this person is, and then you can get the sort of support that they would need. So that's how I would look at helping that person in that transition.
So you mentioned, bringing in a coach, doing a training or something like that. Prior to that, earlier, you mentioned also about when we do trainings, and we've all participated, where it's the best day in the world, and we get to the next day and we completely forget everything that we learned, and there's no follow-up. Tell us a little bit about your 7 positions of leadership and how that may differ, and how do you get people to actually act on what you're trying to give them, as opposed to coming in, doing an 8-hour PowerPoint and leaving and going home and collecting your check and there's nothing happening maybe. What's the difference? What do you do different?
Gotcha. Cool. So, I mean, I'm not a huge PowerPoint fan, I'll be honest with that. For me, I'm more about let's do activities, let's do exercises, because ultimately I fully believe we learn by doing. Okay. Now, ultimately, the way to look at things is with the 7 positions of leadership, it looks at how we relate to people. And I'll give you, because this actually works outside of work as well as in work. So in my relationship, I put my wife first. They say you should always put your significant other first, right?
Yes.
Now, when we go for food, we go to a restaurant, she actually chooses what we eat. Because one, I don't mind too much, and she likes to share. So normally she picks 2 different meals, and then we share. And this is something I specifically want. So she takes the lead. She's up front. She's leading in that relationship. Okay. Now, but that means I'm not first. She's leading, so I'm in the background. I'm supporting her. Now, our relationship works because she also puts herself first. Nothing is like, sounds weird. No, you shouldn't put yourself first, but she does. So because she puts herself first and I'm happy for her to be first, we have a good working relationship. Have you ever had the situation where everyone's trying to be right?
Absolutely.
Or you've got or you've got the righteous manager, the manager that always knows the right thing. Now, if you think, let's say I'm right and the other person is left. Let's just imagine that. So if I'm right, that means my decision is right. I'm normally focused on the right processes, the right way to do things, the righteous personality. Nothing necessarily wrong with that. But if I'm always right, that means nobody else can be right, which can cause tension and challenges. So what I do is I take people through exercises where they can explore these different relationships. Some will find uncomfortable because to be a leader, I was listening to one of your other podcasts the other day, and it's like they said, to be a leader, you need to know where you're going.
Yep.
Now, a lot of people who need to be up front or lead, let's say this, the factory manager we were just spoken about, he might need to be up front. So he needs to know where he's going. I was talking to a colleague coach, and they had someone who was in a manufacturing site, and they were put into that leadership position. They didn't choose it. But just because of redundancies, things like that, reorganization, they had to lead from the front. Now, to lead from the front, you need to know where you're going. And this person struggled with that kind of direction because they didn't necessarily have that before. So ultimately, it's about having these embodied experiences and then getting people to think. Because you can literally I draw this on like bits of paper. Where is the person relative to you? To have that discussion. Because then you can change your position. Ultimately, if I'm being right all the time, well, why don't I just take a step back and stop being right for a moment, let others take the lead? You can do this in meetings as well. Have you ever had that in a meeting when a meeting's not going anywhere? Well, okay, guys, let's just pause, let's just take a step back. Because it allows us to have a bigger overview. So ultimately, I do workshops that give people real life experience, but also talk about the pros and cons of different leadership styles. When I was in recruitment and I had to let go a lot of people, I found it horrendous. It's terrible. Like I really struggled to have those awkward conversations. And I didn't like being right. So if I had a very strong employee who was very strong-willed and they were very right, I've got to tell this person they haven't got a job anymore.
Yep.
But if they're righter than I am, if they've got more certainty than I am, like that's going to be a really awkward conversation. So it's learning where your strengths are, where your weaknesses are, and how you can start to develop. Because all of our interaction is context dependent. You may have a great team, you might be a great leader, but there's one specific situation that you're bad at. And it's there where you need to start to learn to create that flexibility.
That makes sense. And I've always believed that a good leader is going to have, one day they might be one style of leader. The next day they're going to be another style. And I think that's one of the questions that we get in one way, shape, or form many times is, as you progress in any system that you want to look at, there's a progression. And through that progression, is there going to be times, to be the five levels of leadership, the fifth level is when you're training the next line and you're becoming a mentor. And is there ever going to be a day that you're still back at number one? And absolutely, there are days that you need to be the manager and there are days that you need to be the leader. And I just recently, which it's kind of interesting that we're having this conversation, I was talking about young children and as they're learning. And one of the things, my wife is a school teacher, and we were talking a little bit about critical thinking. And that's one of the things many times you'll hear people say is missing today, that graduates coming out of high school and college don't have as much critical thinking. And so we started talking about what critical thinking meant to her as a teacher and what critical thinking meant to me as a business leader. And they're two different things completely. And it made me start to think that I think one of the things we really need to teach young people is that we need to teach them how to switch roles. And so the example that I used was, in a plant setting, there are going to be times that maybe I need to take a back seat and become the helper. And there are going to be other times that I need to be the leader. And so teaching young people how to switch between being the helper and the leader. And there are also times that you come into a situation as a leader, but you recognize that someone else is already in charge and they're already leading. And then you need to step back and take the helper role. And even if they're not doing it exactly how you would, it's their project or their program. So you take the helper role, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I'm just curious what your thoughts would be on kind of that idea of teaching young people that they need to be able to switch between roles.
No, 100%. And I think we all get into, and I think there's a few interesting questions. It's like, well, can I just be myself? You know, like the big thing. And I mean, there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. But for me, ultimately, it's well, can you be flexible? And I think teaching young people the skills to be flexible, but it comes down to, okay, well, what's the intention? Now, it could be, let's say you're doing a debate, or age of kids, you're setting up a debate or a questioning thing. Okay, if I'm the teacher or the educator, what potential roles are there in that? And you could really play with that. For example, with the 7 positions of leadership, one thing I do is we've got the 7 different types of leader, and I give people a different leadership role to play. So it's awkward, it's uncomfortable. That person who is always leading and always stuff, if they have to just sit back and just like, they're going to deal with that internal pressure and that internal challenge. I had a very interesting experience. I was doing a workshop for my continual development, and we were talking about these roles you play. Now, think about when you're in a workshop, or when you're in a workshop that you're actually a participant of. What role do you play? Now, for me, when I'm in a breakout room or like a group activity, I always say, okay, guys, what do we want to do? How do we want to go? How do we want to start? I'm basically getting other people to say who wants to do what. And I always do that. Now, some people would take the lead, okay, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to do that, we're going to do the other. And I decided, okay, let's just do something a bit different. I just didn't speak. I was just like, just hold it in. And we were given a task to do, and nobody spoke. So we all assumed it was we do it by ourselves exercise.
Yep.
So it was just a really interesting way to consider, if you're to actively change the stereotypical role or position or thing that you do, how does that change things? If you're the owner and leading the meeting and you just delegate to somebody else to lead the meeting, you might want to give them a little bit of a heads up. But if you just do that, how do things change? Because sometimes we as the individual can be the thing that keeps the system stuck. So if we remove or change our position in the system, everything else in the system needs to adapt and change, and will at least be different. Will it be great? Will it be good? Who knows? But it'll be different to the stuck situation you're in. Because for me, I'm always about, it's not necessarily always about the outcome, but it's about not being stuck where we are. Because as much, it's important to have goals, but ultimately the problem what we've got is that we're stuck where we're at. So if we can fix that stuckness, things will start to unfold.
I like that. And I think, just to reiterate that, sometimes we might be, us being stuck in our role, in our style, may be the reason that as an organization or a project or a team that we're stuck. Just changing our role may be enough to make something different and make it move differently. I think that's very valuable.
100%. I mean, I was talking to a coach. She was basically 2 years ago, she had a really struggling business. And, I talked about the person being right and left. She always made her employees or co-workers right. So she was doing everything that they told her to, right? As the owner.
Yep.
And basically, she had a bit of a breakdown. And now she's gone the other way. So now she's always right, which is good, but she's left doing everything in the right way because no one else can do it as right as her. So now she's in a situation where she needs to start to learn, okay, how can I give other people the right to be right in certain situations? Like, I don't have to be right and know everything about, let's say, the finances or the administration or payroll or whatever it is. But she's delegating those things because ultimately she's doing all of the hard work and she needs to free up some of that time. So it's interesting how we get stuck in certain ways of thinking, and shifting that up can really make that difference within the team. Just by us changing, that can ripple through the environment we're in.
I like that. So as we're thinking about all of those steps, the 7 positions of leadership, thinking about communication, for somebody that's just getting into leadership, if you had one piece of advice that you had to give them, or could give them rather, of here's one thing, as you're getting started, this is my piece of advice of what you need to do that's going to help you be successful, what would that piece of advice be?
Okay. So this is advice I give leaders, but also to people who are pretty self-critical, people who beat themselves up a lot. So at the end of each day, write down 2 things you did well. So reflect on positive. And then one thing you would do differently. Because we could have the perfect day, but we could still do something differently. If we try and fix, change, do everything, we could drive ourselves insane, because there's so many things as a newer leader that you could do. So 2 things you did well, 1 thing you could do differently. And if you're not sure, maybe you need to ask for help, or you need somebody else to give you some insight, or you need another way to assess these things. Because that way, you give yourself 2 bits of positive reinforcement so you feel good. And what you can do differently is not negative. It's not like, oh, I was terrible at this, terrible at that, terrible at that, terrible at that. It's a developmental way of looking that will build your confidence and build your success on a daily basis.
That makes sense. So I was thinking about this earlier as we were talking, and it kind of hit me. I told you before the interview that I had a hard stop today, and that I wanted to kind of keep things moving, and it just occurred to me. I'm going to take 2 seconds and explain, because we all spend our time as leadership experts, and I'm listening to you, and we're all people too, and we have certain things going on. And so this will air probably about a month later, but my daughter is just finishing up 5th grade, and it's the last day of school, and I got to pick her up here at 10 o'clock. And so I have a Jeep. I took the tops off to make it a little more exciting for her, and I go to pick her up. I've done this since kindergarten. I pick her up on the last day of school, and I blare Alice Cooper's "School's Out for Summer." I started out to embarrass her, I think, a little bit, but now I think she actually looks forward to it. And sometimes the teachers are hear the music and they're getting excited for the last day of school. So I just thought I'd share that for 2 seconds so that people do realize that we do more than just leadership. We all have families and such as well.
And what's beautiful about that is you've created a beautiful anchor to the end of summer that your daughter's got to look forward to. And we can do that in work as well as in life.
Yes.
What are those beautiful things that we can create, those moments that really make life special?
I agree. That's one of the things I think around leadership for the people around us. People are not going to remember the policies that we created while we were the CEO of a business or something like that. They're going to remember the experiences, maybe the moments that we actually sat down and cared about them and taught them something. But they're not going to remember the net profit each year. They're not going to remember those things. They're going to remember the experiences that they had with us during that time. So as we're getting ready to come to a close, I want to make sure I give everybody an opportunity to hear, where can they find out more about you? How can they get engaged with you? If they want to talk to you and see more about your, your 7 positions of leadership, where can they find you?
So you can find me at leadadaptimpact.com, or you can find me Dale Turnbull on LinkedIn. You can connect either way. But open to a conversation to see how I can help you individually or your business and team moving forward.
Awesome. And we will be sure to have those in the show notes as well. And Dale, we like to end every episode with 3 rapid fire questions. The first question really is derived out of many of the conversations I've had over the years with employers. If we could get all of the school administrators across the world into one room and you had a moment to give them one thing that they could add to curriculum or the student's career, in school, that would help turn out a better person, prepared for life and prepared for leadership, what would that one thing be?
That one thing would be banging question and it's quick fire. I would say, start to get the kids playing with how can they be and show up differently, not in a judgmental way, but there is flexibility on how we can be in the world, and everybody is different.
I like it. The second question is, throughout your career, what has been your go-to book that you've continually went back to and got good insight out of?
My go-to book, I would actually say it's probably my most recent one, The Art of Systems Thinking. The Art of Systems Thinking.
I like it. And the last question, in all of the new technologies that are out there, new softwares, AI, all of the things that are available to us today, what are you finding most useful today that is helping you get through each day?
From a technology and business standpoint, I just say I live by Canva at the moment because that helps me with all my socials. So Canva it would be.
Awesome. Dale, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to join us. I hope our listeners have enjoyed, and I hope that maybe we can get you back on in the future. I think you and I could easily talk for an hour or two.
100%. It's been great being here. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And for our listeners, if you've enjoyed this episode, don't forget to check out our past episodes. And also don't forget to like us on whatever platform that you're listening, or follow us rather, so that you can get alerts whenever the new episodes come out. And lastly, at the bottom of the show notes, there's a link you can sign up. And each week we are putting out an episode guide that will help you get the most out of each episode. So feel free to jump in there and get that. And once you sign up, you get them every week. Until next time, we appreciate you.